Welcome to the Women Leading on Climate podcast. I'm Katharine McKenna. It's really easy to feel overwhelmed by climate headlines, but remember, real progress is happening and women are often at the forefront. Here, I speak with incredible climate leaders from Canada and beyond who are stepping up. We discuss how they view this moment, what they're focused on, and what they do to recharge. Plus, stick around for their song picks. Alrighty, another Women Leading on Climate podcast, and now with one of my favorite people, Katharine Hayhoe. Everyone probably who's in the climate world and beyond would know Katharine Hayhoe, a climate scientist, atmospheric scientist who focuses on understanding the impacts of climate change on people and planet, the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy, a distinguished professor and endowed chair at Texas Tech University. She has so many awards, we can't list them all, but including being named Time 100 Most Influential People. She's a United Nations Champion of the Earth. And if you're interested in hearing from Katharine, you should sign up for her Substack, Talking Climate, what's good, what's not so good, and what you can do. But importantly to me is that Katharine, well, we share the same name. And apparently, if you go to her Blue Sky, she has a starter pack that's all the Katharines that work on climate. How many, Katharine? How many?
Over 130 of us.
I think that's a direct relation. There's someone can do some studies on this. Name your child, your daughter Katharine, you're going to be okay on the climate front. She also is Canadian, which is really awesome, and is a graduate of the University of Toronto, where I am also a graduate. And she has a son going to U of T, and I have a daughter going there. So who knows? They may meet each other. Well, Katharine, it's really great. And thank you for joining us today. It's great.
It is lovely to be with you too, Katharine.
Okay, so let's just start that it's really tough out there. This is really, I'm finding it's tough times. I mean, you're a mom and you've got also all the family obligations and everything else, but just working on climate, it's hard because we're seeing, the science and an accelerating climate crisis. And then we thought we were, kind of doing well when it came to politics. And now we're facing some really serious headwinds. And so how are you feeling?
Well, it definitely feels like it gets darkest before the dawn, that's for sure. I often think too of that line, rage against the dying of the light. It's like people are raging against the dying of the fossil fuels, and the fight is even harder now than when we began, if you can believe that. It's hard to believe that, but it is. But it's because we're that much closer. So clean energy is that much more affordable and more abundant. The public will supporting climate action is that much more prevalent around the world. The impacts of climate change are that much more obvious than they were 10 or 20 years ago. If you look at all the pieces, we are that much closer, but that means that everyone who has something to lose from climate solutions, which sadly is the way a lot of the power structures are set up in our world, both politically and economically, those who have the most to lose from climate action are fighting as if their life depended on it, because in some cases it does.
You know what I love, Katharine? You are always very positive. I mean, look, that's a good way of looking at it. We're making so much progress that the entrenched interests, they're just fighting. It's the last gasp. Although we need to make sure that we really are able to win this fight. So it's really weird looking at the United States right now. I know you talk about weirding in the context of weird weather. Well, I don't know. I think there's just weird stuff going on. And I think what's particularly disheartening, and it must be really hard for you because as a climate scientist, are the attacks on science. The U.S. has all these amazing climate scientists like you, these amazing research institutions, these amazing bodies that have led the way on climate science. And now it's as if, you're just going to shut all of this down, hide reports, or they disappear them, and also just make things up. So is that right? What is going on?
That is exactly what's happening. So I have served as a lead author on the U.S. National Climate Assessment since the Bush administration. And they have taken those assessments offline. So people can't even access them anymore. They are shutting down data flows from satellites that are actually still up there recording data paid for by the American taxpayer, yet they just don't want to even make the data available. Grants have been canceled. Data sets that people access online for research purposes are being pulled offline. Information that was paid for, again, by the taxpayer and that is being used for the public good, not just in the US, but around the world, because a lot of data sets are global, right? They're just being taken offline so people can't access them. And what's even worse is this is starting to be rewritten. So the US Department of Energy, for example, put out a report that was just written by 5 people who were not selected in any transparent manner. They were just the only 5 people with any science credentials.
I think a Canadian whose science credentials.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they wrote a report. They were just like, we're going to produce this report.
Yeah, it was not reviewed in any way like government reports are required to be. And so a team of 80 scientists had to put together a rebuttal that was actually just released shortly before we're speaking that goes in detail about how incorrect and how misleading the information is. And so here's the deal. I mean, a thermometer does not give you a different answer depending on your red or blue or green or any color in between. A hurricane doesn't knock on your door and say, excuse me, who did you vote for in the last election, before it rips the roof off your house and floods your basement. So the information is the same no matter how we vote. And then I do want politicians to be arguing. And you know this well, because politicians are great at arguing, right? I want politicians to be arguing over who has the best solutions to climate change. Climate is changing, humans are responsible, the impacts are serious, and the sooner we act, the better off we'll be. But do we prioritize this or that? Do we do large-scale sector-wide policies or even like economy-wide policies like carbon pricing? Do we invest in, developing battery and clean energy technology and efficiency? I want politicians arguing over those things, but we have to start from a common basis of shared facts. And these days, the U.S. is running in exactly the opposite direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's really worrying. I think it's good that we do see folks internationally are saving data sets, but still, I mean, it just increases the misinformation and disinformation that's out there. And it also puts people's lives at risk, because this information is also critical when we have extreme weather events that are caused or, exacerbated, accelerated by climate change. Yeah, okay, let's change tack a bit. So I think what's really interesting when we met, and I was trying to remember when we first met, I actually can't remember, and we decided it's not because we're old, but because we've spent so much time together on so many panels, so many events, and we care about climate and having an impact, so we're out there. But I'm Catholic, Irish Catholic, and I've always been kind of interested between the links between faith and climate, and sometimes it's hard. Like sometimes it's actually some faith groups there's less sometimes maybe it's a generalization, but less acceptance of climate. I was really interested when we had Pope Francis to Laudato Si. He wrote this encyclical Laudato Si. But I think some people are kind of, in the climate world a bit, they feel a bit uncomfortable talking about science on the one hand and faith on the other. And I think what's really interesting is you're pretty upfront about this, that you're an evangelical Christian, and you've even said you're a climate scientist because you're a Christian. So maybe I find that's fascinating. So maybe unpack that.
Sure. So it's completely true that many faith leaders, including Pope Francis and even the newest Pope as well, have made really strong statements in favor of climate action. In fact, after Pope Francis wrote the encyclical, then he wrote a follow-on exposition that came out just 2 years ago. And it was so blunt. I was reading it on my phone. I remember I felt like my phone was going to burst into flames. Like that is how
nice.
He laid it all out there, and he condemned the people who were standing against climate action and talked about the greed that was causing them to do that. I mean, the faith-based voice is so powerful. And in fact, social science identifies some tipping points for positive climate action. And one of the tipping points they identify is making the moral case for climate action.
Ah, yeah.
And that's what faith communities can do, is make the moral case. So it's not just about the economics. It's not just about the efficiency. It's actually about what is right. And that apparently is a very powerful motivator for people to do things. And it's a motivator, I think, that we haven't fully explored. Now, I've had many opportunities to speak to faith-based leaders. In fact, last September, just a year ago, I was in Seoul, Korea, speaking to a gathering of over 10,000 evangelical leaders from around the world.
Wow.
About how our faith was entirely consistent with climate action. Because, like you said, I became a climate scientist because I truly believe that we are called to care for those less fortunate than us. And climate change affects us all, but it disproportionately affects the poorest and most vulnerable, most marginalized people in Canada, in the US, and around the world. And so I felt that as a Christian, it was my responsibility to take the abilities and skills I had to do something about the injustice of this issue. And I know for many of us, like Mary Robinson is somebody who you and I know well and respect so much, former president of Ireland, she became a climate advocate because it was a justice issue too. And so for me, reading the Bible, or even, you can read almost any other religious text, and they have the same key themes of being good stewards of nature or creation that surrounds us and caring for people less fortunate. But what's happened with climate is what's happened over the years with many other issues, and that is that people have used faith, and sadly Christianity specifically, as an excuse for doing something that would not be morally palatable otherwise. And what they're doing in the US, and unfortunately it originated in the US, but it has spread to other countries from the US, is Christian leaders in the US who have become more affiliated with their politics than with their theology. And when they have to decide between politics versus ideology, they will go with ideology over the Bible anytime. They have affiliated themselves with political parties who say climate change isn't real. And so they engage in motivated reasoning, which is, I've already decided we don't want to take climate action. And so let me look for religiously sounding excuses to justify what I'm doing. And unfortunately, those excuses have permeated north of the border. We hear them in Canada. I have run into them elsewhere in the world. In fact, one of my colleagues is a French historian, and he's done a study of climate denial in Christian circles in France. And he has found that without exception, he can track everything back to US sources.
Wow.
Not theological sources. So this is something that is a cultural export from the US that is infiltrating faith-based circles around the world. And part of the reason that's happening, I think, is because they know how powerful the moral argument is. And if they can silence the moral argument, they are actually defeating one of the key tipping points that could help us enact climate action worldwide.
Wow. Well, and it's really interesting that people have studied this and are really seeing the impact, because we see the rise of it certainly here with faith-based groups. Although the flip side is that when I was minister, I actually had so many faith-based groups. There was an organization, or it brought together a number of different faith groups. It was called Green Churches Canada, and they were super supportive. Like, they would do campaigns on carbon pricing, and they'd be out there. And I thought it was really interesting, because I do think sometimes we don't always figure out what drives people, and people are very different. So it depends who you're talking to. But a lot of people, as you say, they, have strong faith. They believe in social justice. They believe in, and that is the, the basis of many, faiths, that you've got to take care of those who are less fortunate, and you have to think about them, and you have to act and support them. And I think that's really powerful. So I'm glad you're out there, because I think we have to counter this narrative. And when you think about the Pope, and now we have Pope Leo, the first American Pope, who's out there, and he has such a large reach. And so if we can tap into that, it really has a huge, ability to have a huge impact on people around the world. So keep it up. Okay, I want to talk, though, about how do we talk to people, not the hardcore climate deniers. You and I both know them. They're on our Twitter feeds or on our social, whether you're on Twitter anymore, but on social media often, or write in, or however they reach us. And, they're hardcore climate deniers, and they often have an agenda. And so there's a small group, maybe 10% of the population. But how do we talk to folks that maybe are just confused, and part of it is legit, because they're just getting bombarded with different messages, different campaigns, often maybe fossil fuel funded or, right-wing conservatives that are, that are spreading misinformation about climate change and about the effectiveness of solutions or our ability to act. So how do we deal with that? Because I know you spend a lot of time thinking about that. How do we talk to folks to convince them or bring them on side, but not in a condescending way, a way that, you're actually, respecting them and helping them understand the science and hopefully bringing them on the side that we need to act?
Well, this is really the question, because the biggest barrier standing in our way, I think, is widespread political will to get this done. We've known since the 1800s that digging up and burning coal and gas and oil produces heat-trapping gases when we burn it that are building up in the atmosphere, wrapping a blanket around the planet, causing it to warm. We've known for decades that it's supersizing our extreme weather events, including our heat waves, our wildfires, our storms, and more. We know that the faster we transition to clean energy, the better off we'll all be. In fact, an Oxford study last year found that we would save at least $12 trillion US around the world. And if we did it faster, we'd save more money. So it's not even an economic issue anymore. It's simply an inertia issue and a will issue. So for me as a climate scientist, for a long time I thought, if you just tell people it's real, it's us, it's serious, we have to fix it, that's enough. And for a long time, the folks at Yale who study public communication on climate change, that was their message. It's real, it's us, it's serious, and there are solutions. But just this year, they updated what people need to know, and their update completely aligned with what I've already been discovering from the social science. And that is, we also need to know that others care and there is hope. Mm-hmm. Because if we think we're alone, we're not going to do anything. And if we don't think there's any chance of changing anything, we're not going to do anything either. So you could have the whole world worried about climate change, but if they don't know what they can do and they don't think they can do anything, they'll do nothing. And, we'd be happier just eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow you die, right? Than being worried, but incapacitated and paralyzed. So often we think, and I run into people on social media every day who say this, we think, people don't know enough. If they knew more about the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, they would understand why climate action is so urgent. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but no, that's not what's holding people back. People have to understand why it matters to them personally and what they can do about it. So when you look at the data, here's what the data says on public opinion. It's fascinating. It shows that around the world, including Canada and yes, including the US as well, the majority of people are worried about climate change. The majority are worried. Mm-hmm. And they're worried about its impact on plants and animals, on people in the future, on people who live in developing countries. But then you ask, are you worried about how it will affect you? And I would change the question to how it is already affecting you, because it's not the future anymore. That number is cut in half. So fully half the people who are worried don't think it affects them. And then you ask them another question. You say, do you ever talk about it? Because as humans, how do we get anything done? We have to start by talking about it, right? Like that's how we work together, by communicating. And it could be writing, it could be speaking, it could be online, it could be in person. Or it could just be doing something where other people can see you do it. But we communicate, and that's how we get stuff done. It turns out the vast majority of people around the world are not talking about it. So that's why I'm such a huge advocate for having the conversation. My TED Talk is all about how to talk about it. My Talking Climate newsletter gives people tips on how to talk about it. I have a book, Saving Us, that talks about it. I've written articles for everything from Chatelaine magazine to Real Simple on how to talk about climate change. And it's not about explaining the ocean currents or the Atlantic or the Antarctic ice sheet to people. It's about making what I think of as the head to heart to hands connection. Mm-hmm. So yes, most people agree it's real and it's serious, but how does it affect me? And so this relates to what we were talking about before. For people of faith, how does it intersect with the core tenets of my faith? For people who are parents like you and me, how does it affect our kids' lives? I'm part of a group called Science Moms, where we're all about how climate change affects our kids. For people who might be athletes, How is it affecting their ability to practice their sport outside in many ways, from tennis to swimming to winter sports? For people who are simply paying the insurance premium on their home. I don't know about yours, but ours went up 50% last year because of all the risks from extreme weather events. Or in Talking Climate every week, I talk about different ways. Like last week, it was matcha tea is being affected, as are bananas and almonds and things like that. So we have to make the head to heart connection, but then we can't stop there. We have to make the heart to hands connection, because most people don't understand what real climate solutions look like and how their voice is such an important part of it. So actually, if you don't mind, I would love to just flip the script for a second for you, because using our voice is incredibly influential in democratic societies. And you served in government. How did you see individual voices making a difference?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I love this. I love this analogy that it starts with your head, then your heart, and then your hands. Um, it's interesting. One thing I say to folks, because if you think about how do you affect change, and I think it can feel debilitating because a lot of it is really big, or it's expensive, right? You can't afford an EV, or you might not have access to public transit. But what I really saw, and I think it's important probably in the context of what we're seeing in the United States, is actually solidarity. So being on the streets, like sometimes like a lot of people think, oh, what does that actually do? First of all, I think it's really important because it's to the heart part. It's this connection that you have with other people that you may not even know, that you all believe in something and you share that. And it can be motivated for different reasons. You could be a mom, you could be a kid worried about your future, you could be a farmer worried about your crop. It doesn't actually matter what it is. But it's also, then you can see change because you demand it. And you're demanding politicians step up. And it's interesting because for folks that say, well, my voice doesn't matter, you know what? It's almost like when these marches were going on, I would look out the window with the prime minister and other ministers, because it was actually right in front of Parliament. And I mean, this is more an analogy, but this is what was going on in the cabinet. Like there were discussions, and they would say, oh, do we need to do more on climate? I was like, yes, 100, look at that, they're demanding it. And it was then like, sometimes, of course, it's good if you can make different choices in your life, but politics really matters. So to those who are listening, do not think being out on the streets doesn't matter. Because I hear that from folks, they say, doesn't matter what change are you getting. No, politicians respond because they look and they say, I'm feeling pressure now. I don't like feeling pressure. I feel like they're saying we're not doing enough. And I was like, yes, they are saying you are not doing enough. And that also means that you're thinking about, okay, I got to get elected. That's what politicians think. And so they think, well, I better do this. And then they also notice who's out on the streets. And a lot of politicians have kids. So then they're like, or grandkids. And they're like, okay, they're out there asking, demanding action, and I have grandkids and I have kids. So I actually think it's interesting what actually results in change. It can be you directly, but because we also need scale, that you need to elect politicians that actually care. And I know in the context of the US, because I talked to folks early on in the administration. And if you're watching from afar, it's really weird because you're like, oh my God, all these bad things are really happening. And everyone just seems like they're just there. And I think people are just overwhelmed. And I said, and it's scary. I also will not diminish that you don't want, it is, there are some people who really want to crack down hard on demonstrations, but solidarity and being with other people and then having politicians who care feel like there are people demanding, it is actually a virtuous cycle. So to folks out there, it does, I can say this as a politician, I saw people on the streets and it was a very diverse group. And it was, religious leaders, as I said, it was young people, it was grandparents, it was farmers, it was just so many people that were out there demanding action. That actually led to change. I can tell you that led to more ambitious policies. And in the campaign, we stepped up, we said we're going to do more. We had new policies that we wouldn't have had. So please, it also makes you feel better to be with other people, because I think it is lonely otherwise. So I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but I will say, if you think it doesn't matter being on the streets, it does. So, be with other people. do campaigns with other people. Of course, look at what you can do, but a lot of this is we got to hold the big polluters to account. So the way to do that is it is governments that have a role in regulating. It is companies feeling pressure from people that are buying their products, or from pensioners, like you have your pension, demanding that they're not investing in fossil fuels. That's your money. Workers saying, I don't want you to use, my retirement savings to go towards fossil fuels. It's young people saying, when they go for jobs, like, they don't want to work for companies. They will take less salary, it's been shown, if companies are working on climate. So I think there are different ways to be doing this as a group. So you don't feel so lonely, but also you can get scale. So
that was perfect. That was exactly.
Did I pass? I feel like I'm in the class for Katharine Hayhoe's class. Oh, did I get an A or did I get a B plus?
No, you get a solid A on that, because that's what the social science says, is that so often we're such an individualistic society, and so people focus on my EV or my solar panels or my diet or how I do or don't travel, but we can't fix this alone. We have to fix it together. And like you just said, we need to know we're not alone. In fact, the Yale program on climate change communication, like I said, they updated what people need to know. It's real, it's us, it's serious, and there are solutions, to you're not alone and there's hope. We need to know we're not alone. So social science says that the most important thing we as an individual can do has nothing to do with our individual carbon footprint. The most important thing we can do is, first of all, have a conversation about why it matters and what we can do, heart and hands. Number 2, join a climate action group, like you just alluded to, climate action groups to amplify the voice. Number 3, you also mentioned, seriously, you got an A without even studying. Number 3 is to consider where you keep your money, including your bank, your pension, your investments and things like that, and what you do and don't spend money on. Then the next one is to use your voice with your elected officials, which you also mentioned. And then you also said this, make changes in your personal life. So yes, if we have the ability to make better choices in our personal life, we should, in terms of what we eat, where we live, how we drive, things like that, and how we travel, but then make them contagious by talking about them.
Totally.
And Bill McKibben says something awesome. He says the most important thing an individual can do, talking about climate action, is not be such an individual.
I love it. And it is our society. It seems to reward this. So we want to talk about this, but talk about what you're doing and make it infectious. Like heat pumps, maybe not so sexy, but it will save you money. So I love it. There's so many people online that are like on the heat pump thing, and I'm moving and I'm getting heat pumps and solar panels. I will be off fossil fuels. Woohoo. I'm lucky to be in the position to do that, but don't worry. I'm going to be shouting from the rooftops about this.
Exactly. Tell people about it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe let's take this in a different tack. Like, it is hard working on climate. Like the reality is it can get tough. And I think you gotta rejuvenate, you gotta take a break. I always tell everyone, and people laugh on my social media. They're like, "Oh my God, McKenna's swimming again." I was like, "Yes, I am swimming again," because that is where I get into my happy place. So what do you do? What do you do when you feel like you want to recharge?
Well, this is such an important question, because over the last year or so, I feel like I've become increasingly convinced that self-care is climate action.
Oh, interesting.
If we are not sustainable, how can we effectively advocate for a sustainable future? You have to practice what you preach.
Yeah.
And so too often we're so aware of and conscious of and driven by how urgent this issue is and how many people are already suffering today. And every minute we delay action, another person dies from exposure to extreme heat, or another person's home is destroyed, or another kid has to drop out of school. And so it's very easy to be unsustainable, but we have to be sustainable too. And so for me, a big part of being sustainable is spending time doing the things I love with the people I love in the places I love, because that's why I'm fighting for climate action. And if I don't recharge my batteries, then how am I going to keep on going? I'm going to be like on the dregs. So for me, spending time in nature is so restorative, either by myself or with family. And, the science even bears it out. After 15 minutes out in nature, the stress hormones in your body change.
I love it.
Your
Yeah.
physical health, your mental health is just so much better when you're outside in nature. That's just what we as humans, where we're meant to be. And so for me, it's paddling. I love getting out on the lake and paddling. Um, or if I can't paddle, then just finding a green space with some trees and walking through it and spending some time sitting outside under a tree on the grass or preferably in the forest or wherever I am, finding those green spaces and just spending some time there. I also really like to, so much of what I do is intangible. And I'm sure you probably feel the same way, right? Like talking or writing or, advocating or planning. And so I find it very cathartic to create tangible things, whether it's baking for my family, whether it's knitting, I love doing that. Making something tangible that I can look at that makes the world a better place for me and for
I
people
love
I love.
it. If I knit, it would actually be terrible. So I won't. Knitting
Crocheting?
isn't
Try
my thing.
crocheting.
Crochet, yeah, macrame or like rug hooking. I used to rug hook. I think I can do
Oh,
that.
that's good.
Okay, so something you and I have both experienced, which is not a positive thing, is a lot of online hate and threats. And I think we got to talk about it a bit because I know, like, it's not the most, fun topic, but if we don't address it, I think we're not helping others who maybe don't have a voice like we do. Like, and we call it out every once in a while. We don't spend most of our time doing that, but uh, what, like, you've done, I love everything we talk about because you're like, I have some hard research on this, but I mean, there is a consensus circle that I didn't actually know existed of climate denial and misogyny. And it was really weird. I suddenly had, like, I became this Minister of Environment and Climate Change. I thought it was amazing. I'd use social media to get elected, to engage with folks. And suddenly, like, people are pounding me, like, climate Barbie. There's a Barbie doll and it's being slammed and destroyed, or, other many other things. So what's going on, and what do we need to do to address it? Because I think this is really important because it is resulting in silencing people, often women. If you're a member of the LGBTQ2 plus community, I've talked to a lot of racialized or indigenous women. They get attacked, and we know this is true also of journalists, often women journalists covering climate, scientists, environmental defenders. What the heck? What the heck, Catherine?
Well, we could probably do like our own mean tweets episode. We could probably do
Totally.
like
We'd read them out.
yes, we could
Cry,
do one
laugh,
every day.
cry.
Yes. In fact, sometimes you have to laugh so you don't cry. So I've actually made some videos on my Instagram account where I do read out some of these posts because they're so ridiculous.
I know.
And it is just absolutely brutal. And I still remember when this first started happening, I was like, where is this coming from? I didn't sign up for this. How am I supposed to deal with it? Nobody ever told me, let alone taught me, how to cope with the massive avalanche of online hate. And when I say massive, just as an example, one post on Twitter about how climate is changing and humans are responsible has gotten me as many as 3,000 hateful comments, calling me all kinds of names you can imagine, inviting me to kill myself. And you get exactly the same type of thing. It's worst currently on X, which is why I'm not very active on X at all because it just isn't effective anymore. But I still get it every day on Facebook. I get it a couple times a week on LinkedIn. I get it, a couple times a week on Instagram or Threads. Once in a while on Blue Sky, not that often.
Blue Sky, happy place, still a happy place.
Still, it is a happy place, yes. What is the deal? So, whenever I've asked myself this question. I know you have too, and we've talked about this before. Whenever we get this avalanche of hate from people you don't know, you have to say, what is causing it? Mm-hmm. And what's causing it is it's coming from people who perceive what we're talking about and even who we are as a threat. They perceive the message that climate is changing, humans are responsible, the impacts are serious, we have to do something about it. And even worse, the fact that it's a woman saying that, they perceive it as a direct threat to their identity, to their ideology, to whatever it is they hold dear. Research has shown there's a very strong correlation between misogyny and racism and climate denial. So I mean, the only thing that would make our situation worse is if we were an Indigenous woman or a woman of color. Like,
Yeah,
that's the only
totally.
thing
Yeah.
yes. So, unfortunately, there's this confluence of people who, and we didn't talk at all about this yet, but I want to mention this because in the US, about 10%, and in Canada, a bit less than that, but still a healthy percent, around, say 8 or 9%, are dismissive. And my definition of somebody who's dismissive on climate is if an angel from God with brand new tablets of stone saying global warming is real and foot-high letters of flame appeared to a dismissive person, they would dismiss them. So who are we to think we can change their minds? I literally don't think we can. I literally think it takes an honest to God miracle to change a dismissive's mind. I don't think I'm in that business myself. And so I just don't think there's any point to us engaging with or arguing with these people. In fact, what they're looking for is an argument. Because deep down, most of them know they're wrong. But it's so deep down that they would never admit it to anybody. And because they're constantly fighting the feeling of they're on the wrong side of history, they're arguing with people. And arguing strengthens and feeds their resistance and their denial. So with those people, unfortunately, even though if we have good answers to them, the best thing to do is just block them and move on.
That's what I tell folks. I'm like, do not engage. I had my eldest would sometimes go back on Twitter and do response. I'd be like, no. I mean, it would kind of be funny. It would be trying to make a joke of what they said. I was like, no, do not. That is exactly what they want. And then they want to amplify it with others and God knows what happens. But you're right. Like, and I actually had really lovely people, like Canadians that were, really on side. They didn't like the attacks I got. They also didn't like the misinformation. They'd try to engage, and you would see where it would go. It would, like, first of all, you could have 100, messages back and forth. I was like, hey, you got to make dinner. You got to do something. Go for a walk. Like, just please. No, and I'm not saying those are people defending me or defending climate. It's the others. I was like, literally give it up. But no, they're quite happy to continue. So it is a lesson. I mean, it's hard, right? Because you're like, I can fix this. I'm just going to explain to them, like, science, or actually be a nicer person. Don't attack people because of how they look or because you don't like what they say. But
that's exactly it. I have so, like, on Twitter back in the day, I had exhaustive threads explaining how we know that volcanoes, cosmic rays, natural cycles, solar radiation, planet Nibiru is not responsible for climate change. And it didn't change any dismissive minds. It was helpful to everybody else, but not to them. So engaging is not the answer. But I think what I have to do too is I have to remind myself, I mean, first of all, self-care is important. So taking social media apps off my phone was very helpful to me.
Yeah.
So I didn't engage with them like when I was making dinner or being with my family. And then also just, I don't know about you, but it helps me to just stop sometimes and consciously remind myself, they don't know me. And my value and my worth is not dependent on what they say or think about me. I mean, I imagine in politics, that's something you have to do like almost hourly, isn't it?
Well, I have a book called Run Like a Girl, and you'll see. I mean, it is true, right? You're just like, why me? And then you realize, like, it doesn't, in a way, it doesn't matter. You're doing your job, and so you got to keep on keeping on. But it's hard, right? It is hard. It gets you down because you just are like, I'm just a reasonable person. I'm like a regular person. I'm in this job. I've got a job to do. But yeah, it's hard. I did find on Twitter, I really do need to fully get off Twitter, but that now that you have the function where people can only respond if you follow them, very good function. I mean, also block. But as I try to tell people, the problem with block is that, they can still see what I'm saying. They can still attack. There's ways to get around that. It's better if they just can't respond. Yeah. But anyway, enough about that. I mean, I do think we need to look at regulating social media, and we need to be, and it's beyond obviously just climate. It's, baiting of children and pornography and many, many other things that are, that can be really problematic. But and holding social media companies accountable, including on the disinformation and misinformation, which is getting to be a huge thing. But we could do a whole show on that. So we're coming to the end, Katharine. We have lots of women, but also everyone who's listening in. They're like, what do we do now? Like, what at this moment in time where it is really challenging? We have all these awesome solutions, but at the same time, there's this political pushback, and what you write this newsletter, you're constantly thinking about like, what can people do? So what we've touched on it a bit, but if you're going to be kind of practical, what would you say to folks that they can do now in this particular moment that's really hard?
Well, this sounds so simple, but it's actually really hard to have conversations about climate change. Where you work, where you go to school, the people you walk your dog with or play ultimate frisbee with or go to church with. But if we don't talk about it, why would people care? And if they don't care, why would they ever support action? And we need action at every level. It isn't just federal. We need action at the provincial levels and the state levels. We need it at the county and the township levels. We need them for cities, for businesses, for schools, for organizations. And when you look at how change has happened, and this is a fascinating historical analysis too. If you look at how social change has happened in the past, it is rarely because the person in charge decided that it had to happen. It's rare that it's like the head of a country or a city or a CEO or some, big, famous, powerful, rich person. Most of the time, change happens because somebody of no particular power or influence or fame. And you look at people like Nelson Mandela, William Wilberforce, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Martin Luther King Jr. You look at the people whose names we know now, they were no particular people, but they knew something. They knew that their voice mattered. And they were working in community with thousands of other people who also knew their voice mattered. And they tried and tried, and they failed and they failed, and they picked themselves up and they tried again, and eventually they won. And they won because they knew how to use their voice. Every single one of us has a voice. I mean, there's a kid called Robert in Toronto who has the Children's Climate Championship YouTube channel. I met him when he was 8 years old, and he was doing videos on climate change on YouTube. There are senior citizens like the Swiss woman who sued their country for violating their human rights because elderly people are disproportionately affected by climate change, especially extreme heat. There are people of every age, of every education level, of every strata in society, and every single one of us has a voice. And if we use it, that's how we can change the world. So that is my challenge to you if you're listening, is use your voice and find other people, like you said, in community, find other people who also want to use their voice to call for that same change. Get together with them and do not give up until it happens. But that's why we have to do it together.
I love it. But this is what Women Leading on Climate is all about. That women, we know, studies show that women and girls are 2.5 times more likely to talk about climate change, to push for climate action. And, if you look at this, even stats like if you have women in your C-suite on your board, you're more likely to even disclose your emissions. So there is power. Sometimes you can feel lonely, but you should always know there's another woman or girl who's speaking up about climate. So you're not alone, even if you can be alone, you feel like you're alone in the room. Okay, so this has been so fun. I wish we were hanging out, maybe somewhere paddling on a lake or something. But I was like leaving, like imagining that we're like having a drink, we're, a glass of wine, sitting on the couch, playing some tunes. So if we were doing that, what would you ask me to put on the stereo?
I would ask probably for a Canadiana playlist with all the classics from, Sarah McLachlan and Blue Rodeo and Bare Naked Ladies and all those. But if I had to pick one song, I really like Ordinary Day by Great Big Sea, and I think it's so apropos for this moment in time. It's talking about how, I've been battered but not bruised, and it's all your state of mind. You lose some, you win some, but you get back up, and you're grateful for the fact that there's a sky over your head and you're surrounded by water, which in Canada we have so much of, and you understand why you're fighting, so you just keep on going. So I would ask for Ordinary Day.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, Katharine. It's so great to connect with you. I can't wait to see you in person. And thanks for being always so positive and practical. It's awesome. And just keep on fighting. Just keep on going.
Thank you, and same to you.